Hey folks, welcome to Tools 101 with DM General. As you can see, today's topic, marking tools. Now, before we get into anything, I always want to make sure that you understand this. Safety first. It doesn't matter what the task is or where you are, make sure you're always being safe. So, how can you be safe? Wearing things called PPE or personal protective equipment. That's this hard hat, safety glasses, earplugs, face mask, gloves, long sleeve shirt, long pants, safety toe shoes, and so much more. Always make sure that you're always being safe. You want to make sure you get home in one piece. I want to make sure you get home in one piece. So please be safe. Now, we don't have much on the table. It doesn't look like much, but believe it or not, these are the second most important things that you should always have. Doesn't matter what kind of craft or project you're getting into. Make sure you have something in this category, a marking tool. And why I say that? Because other than measuring tools, you need to indicate where a change is going to happen. So if something's going to get cut, something's going to get drilled, something's going to, you're going to butt something up somewhere, you need to mark it and you need to know where it is when you're marking it. Well, you know, this is what you need. So always make sure, and mind you, these have been part of the human experience from like the dawn of time, basically. Um, and you can always improvise marking tools. For example, if you're hiking and you're setting up a boundary line or whatever, or you're marking where you have to relieve yourself or something, you use something to indicate where something has happened, where there was a change from what was originally there. Marking tools. So it kind of is in that ballpark, okay? And that's just more improvised. I would say this: when you get a marking tool and you're using it, make sure you're using the right one for whatever it is that you're doing. Because if you're using the wrong one, you can find yourself doing double work or making a mistake that is almost impossible for you to undo. So always make sure you have the proper marking tool and you're using it correctly. Now, the good old fashioned pencil. Now, this does not look like your old fashioned pencil. Why? Because it's flat on two sides and it's not circular like your number two pencil or the other pencils out there, like, that you see. This is considered a carpentry pencil. It makes it easier when you're marking wood, especially if you need to get a nice flat side and you need to cut like a sharp edge per se on one side, on the side, so that way you can mark your line. This works great. It makes it easier for you to hold. Okay. This doesn't mean that you cannot use any other pencil. If you have another pencil, it's fine. No big deal. It's not the end of the world. But this is a carpentry pencil, and I would say this: no matter where you are, no matter what you're working on, like there's almost like no limit to how many pencils you can have. Always have a pencil because you don't know where you're gonna need one. So, and this works great on a lot of surfaces are, I'll say, abrasive enough. So, for example, sheetrock or wood, um, even some forms of masonry. I would use. You could use a pencil. Granted, with masonry though, even though it's abrasive, I would use something more like chalk, than a lead pencil. But it's fine if you use a pencil. Just make sure you're being attentive to where you've marked. But pencil. And usually pencils, there's no eraser because a lot of times you're not erasing what you did. When you're getting into the trades and things like that and you mark something, you usually are not erasing what you did because a lot of times, let's just say you have to saw something, usually the saw takes away the mark that you did, or whatever it is that you mark gets hidden with something else. Long story. Either way, pencil. Now, you may be wondering, why do I have a marker and not a pen? Well, pens do not work as good as markers most of the time. Well, a lot of times in the field or a lot of times in projects. Why? Because most pens out there are rollerball. So at the tip of a pen, it has a little rolling ball pin. I mean, a little rolling ball in the tip of the pen that it needs to catch some of the ink. Some of the ink that's in the tube in the pen needs to roll onto, needs to basically pour onto that ball. And then the ball will then, as it's moving on whatever surface you're working on, it needs to transfer that ink from itself now to whatever surface you're working on. And some surfaces just don't do well with ink, especially with the ball being an applicant. And it just not does not work out. I've seen, for example, like this desk. This desk, I wrote it with a marker. Why? Because it did not work well with a pen. Marker uses more like a brush, is a little bit of a harder brush compared to like your paintbrush kind of thing, but it works, like a brush slash sponge. It works more like a sponge, really. Um, but it applies the ink directly to it, and the ink is different than like your pen ink. This ink actually dries like super fast. I forget like the type of ink it is, but it dries super fast on the surface. Marking it, it kind of like soaks into that surface. So pens work really good. It gets into the grooves, especially if the surface is uneven. It can get into the grooves if it's just the right depth, and it'll be hard for the ink to come out. So that way, when you need to go and take care of something, let's just say you had to leave real quick and come back, you don't have to worry about your mark disappearing so easily. So this works amazing. It works in areas, especially where pencils do not work. You can use this in just about the same locations as pencils, except here's the thing. Because this uses like a sponge um, slash brush, the applicator can get damaged relatively easily. So you have to be careful. I would not use this on something that can get it contaminated or very dirty. So I would not use this on something like sheetrock and also in terms of sheetrock, side note, if you use this on sheetrock, you run a very strong possibility of this ink bleeding through your paint and showing up on the other side, ruining whatever it is. So make sure you do not use this on something like sheetrock. Use this on something like, let's just say you're about to drill out, a piece of wood or something like that. You can mark it with this. That's fine. Or but the goal is to drill out the mark so you don't see it anymore. Or if you're going to cut something, that's fine. But make sure that you're careful. Some surfaces can contaminate, like wood. The sawdust can contaminate it, and it will soak up that ink, and it will be harder for this to apply the ink to whatever surface you're working on. So make sure when you're using this, you're being mindful of the application. But markers work amazing. They do a lot better than using a pen. Now, tape, you may be wondering, why do I have tape? Well, tape works as a great marking tool to indicate where something is or to identify things. For my electricians, you use tape like this for phase tracing. So if you get into electrical, you will see when you have multiple phases, you want to use the appropriate colored tape to identify which phase wire you have, like in your panel or to whatever equipment is on the other side. You use this kind of tape. Also, make sure when you're using this type of tape, you're being consistent at all times because this will save lives and time. And believe it or not, some people have almost died. So always make sure you're using the appropriate tape for the task, okay, for whatever it is you're tracing. Also, another thing, if you need this to hold something in place and identify if it's maybe spare wire, for example, you use this and you can, many times, like some folks, if you got different colored tapes, they will, wrap around whatever it is they need to wrap around, and they'll put like a little tab, out of the tape, they'll make a tab, and then they can write on tab. And with that, they can write whatever note they need to write on it. So that way, either for themselves later in the future, they can address it accordingly, or for the next technician will know, okay, oh, this is a spare wire for this circuit is going from here to here, and this is how many conductors or whatever, things like that. I did a lot of telecom and electrical work, so it's the easiest thing I can refer back to. But electrical tape is your best friend. I will also say this. Please make sure when you're buying electrical tape, you get a good quality electrical tape. Do not buy some of the cheap brands out there because you're trying to save a buck. I've seen it happen. And what ended up happening is that the tape could not handle either the whatever atmospheric conditions it was applied in. And because of that, it fell off. Now you don't know what wire is for what or whatever it is, and the whole point of marking has now been destroyed or is no use anymore, um, or no good. So make sure when you get tape, you got the right tape. All right, they do sell these in your big box stores in multiple colors, so get the tape. And they got different sizes, so get the size that's appropriate, so that way you're not doing as much work when you're marking, etc., etc. Right, electrical tape. Any tape will work. Like I've seen painters use painters tape to identify things. They'll write a certain name or color or something like that on the tape, and it works amazing. Tape is a very great tool to use, so do not sleep on tape. If you're using something that is hard to see the ink of the regular permanent marker, that's where you use a paint pen. And this, it will come out silver. This one in particular, it will come out silver. So it would match the color that it's that the cap is. And this is a big deal, especially when, let's just say you got wiring or something that's a dark color already and you need to mark it. It could be wood even, or black pipe or anything like that. Black steel pipe, you could use this and it'll work just fine. This is still just like a permanent marker. So please, 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 please be mindful of where you're applying this. Okay. Now, this is a scratch all. This is used for, well, scratching surfaces, or let's just say you need to make a hole in something. But you could also use this for scratching a mark on wood, on metal, sometimes on masonry, depending on what it is. You could use this. You know, this is a great thing to have, especially if you don't want to mark it with a pencil or a marker or something like that. You use this and it leaves a more permanent mark because you're actually affecting the surface of the material that you're working on. So you're making some kind of impact or indent or scratch or score on it, and because of that, it's harder for the mark to disappear without, like for example, let's just say you use a marker on wood. Sometimes because wood is very absorbent, is very porous, it would absorb the ink in different directions. And maybe you just want the line to be just like this. But if you use a permanent marker, for example, you see that line will go on. It may go on looking thin. And the next thing you know, over time, you see that mark get nice and wide because wood is porous and, well, ink is wet. So it will do that. It will just absorb that ink. And then next thing you know, it's the line that you made that was so fine is not so fine anymore. So this also works great in that purpose. This also works good if you want to make a bit of an indent or a hole where you want your screws to go into, for example, things like that. You can use this. You can also use this. This is a center punch. This one in particular has a spring action on it. So that way it can really put a mark in the material you're working on. So let's just say you're drilling and you don't want your drill bit to walk. This is what you use. You put it down on the thing. And if any of you got those newer type of rescue glass break / seatbelt cutters, this uses the same action. So you just put it against the surface you're working on, push the push down. You heard that? And literally it with a spring action, it impacts the surface you're working on, making an indent, and because of that, it makes it easier for like your drill bit to stay centered or in place where it needs to be. So this works great. Mind you, there are plenty of different types of punches. There's so many different types. I know I have another one where literally you put it on the surface and you hit it with a hammer. You hit the back of it with the hammer, and that's how it marks the material that you're working on. And it works great on metal, wood, plastic, whatever it is, especially if you don't want your drill bit to walk, because I've seen that happen on job sites where somebody's trying to drill something and the drill bit will start in one spot and it will end here before it bites into the material. Well, this helps save you of that issue. Sorry for dropping it. I don't know how loud it's going to show up, but a punch. Last but not least, this is a chalk line. Now, you may notice if I pull this out, I don't know if on the camera it will show, but there's chalk in this container, in this black chalk in this case. Okay. Chalk lines are used for marking long distances. So instead of, now you got to put a tape measure and try to guide your pencil along the tape measure going 10 feet. No, you don't have to do all that. This actually goes an extended amount of a distance. So for example, you could be you could need to mark 20 feet, in a straight line. That's where you use a chalk line. You use this hook on the end of the chalk line. You hook whatever surface it is that you need to hook onto. You make sure that the lever of your chalk line is pointing away from the actual body so that way it doesn't catch on. And you just pull the chalk line, keeping tension on it, get all the way to the other end of wherever it is you're working on. Put the string against the material that you're working on. Pull up, like pull up, arm's length away or wherever distance that's comparable. Put up a good distance away where the string, you could feel that the string is spring loaded. So you want the string to be tight. You pull it up and you let it go and you let it snap back. Um, you may hear the term like snap a line or something like that. They usually are talking about this, and it would mark the chalk in this because it's on the string. It will mark everywhere that the string was as best as it could. Now, if the material you're working on is not level, it will miss those areas potentially, but usually it gets the most part that line, and then you can work from there. This works on metal, plastic, PVC, masonry. I haven't seen it really too much on metal actually. Scratch that. This usually works great on wood, uh, masonry, um, plastic not so much, but usually wood and masonry I've seen this used the most. Um, Also, I will say this for anybody who is going to use a chalk line, make sure you're careful on what color chalk line you use. Some chalk lines, the chalk is permanent. So that means if you make a mistake, that color is staying. I've noticed some guys, I think red was like the most permanent color, if I remember correctly. Some roofing guys were knocking a chalk, were about to snap a chalk, and they actually made a little mistake and they snapped it on the shingle, on like the visible part of the shingles, and the mark didn't come off. So now, like on that client's house, that whole row of shingles had a red chalk line going all the way across, and it wouldn't wash off. Um, so just make sure you have the right color. I usually would recommend like a blue because it fades away a little easier than red, for example. The black has worked great for me, but it doesn't mean that you're limited to those. There's multiple colors, but just make sure that you get one that works. So that's it for this one. I will say, please make sure when you're using a tool, you're using the right tool and you're using it in the right application. Don't want anybody getting hurt. And always remember something when you're marking something. Usually, when you're marking something, you're also measuring. And when you measure, there's always this term that's said so many times: measure twice, cut once. Measure twice, cut once. Say it with me. Measure twice, cut once. It doesn't matter if you have to measure the same thing 3, 4, 5 times before you cut it. Do that. If you have to do calculations, especially if you're doing math for something and you're getting certain, calculations for where you got to cut and all that kind of stuff. If you have to do the calculations 3, 4 times to make sure you put in all the variables of where this is, that, this, that, and the third, make sure you do that, especially if you're getting into joinery and you got to measure the part that you're cutting, but then you also have to measure how much. For example, if you want to do tongue and groove, you got to measure for your tongue and groove. You got to measure for your dovetails. You got to measure for your mortise and tenon. You got to make measurements for these things. Otherwise, you might find yourself cutting yourself short. And mind you, you can always make more cuts, but you cannot always add more material. So always make sure that you're using that method of measure twice, cut once, measure twice, cut once. All right. Anyway, I hope that blesses you guys. I hope you like what you see. Please like, share, comment, subscribe, smash that notification bell. I would also recommend that if you want to see a particular topic, feel free to make mention of it. I have no problems going over a different topic. Obviously, I got more topics to go over, more things to go over, so that way we can get our one-on-one in. Please feel free, share it. You never know, it might be the next one. Okay. So, before I let you go, always make sure if you're a homeowner, one, two, three, four. If you're a homeowner, if you're getting into trades, one, two, three, and then four, and then whichever one of these, according to the trade that you're getting in, usually when you're getting into trade, you will have somebody who will tell you what extra things you will need. Make sure you listen to their instructions. Who knows? They might tell you not to take something that I recommended. That's fine. You're in that trade. You're doing that task. Make sure you're following what's being instructed to you, so that way you don't mess up and you're prepared enough for whatever. I'd rather you be over prepared than under. So I say these things, but please make sure you're always following the instructions necessary for whatever it is you're doing. So anyway, that's enough for today. Like I said, I hope this blesses you guys. I really do love sharing with you about Tools 101, and I hope you enjoy it too. All right, guys, talk to you soon. Peace.